Hello, everybody, and welcome to SimFest. My name is Harriet. I'm the content producer for Secret Mode. And today we've got a very special panel where we will be discussing what is a hobby sim and why do people play them. So I'm going to let everybody else introduce themselves. I will start with Dan.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Chequer. I'm lead designer on PowerWash Simulator at Futurlab. Pass over to Andres.
My name is Andres. I am a programmer at Auroch Digital, and I'm working on Brewmaster. Stefan?
Hi, I'm Stefan. I also work at Auroch Digital as the Unity lead, and I was a programmer on Mars Horizon.
Hi everybody, my name is Philomena Schwab. I'm the co-founder of Stefan Studio, who made a couple of simulation games, currently The Wandering Village, and today I'm mostly here about our game Niche, a genetic survival game.
Okay. So for those of you that don't know, a hobby sim is basically a kind of like a first-person view of a hobby or a job. There's so many of them. There's a lot of it kind of like it can replicate the job, and also the game setting is less about kind of like a imaginary or fantasy settings and more along the lines of kind of like the real world. But it does depend entirely on the sim. There is a sim game for everyone. So we've got a couple of questions to ask our panelists today. So we've all introduced ourselves, but the first thing we should really go on to is what is your game about and what job or hobby does it simulate? I think let's start with Philomena.
So yeah, in my case, it's not really a first-person game. It's more like you have an overview of a group of animals and you basically try not to go extinct. So it's a survival game. But the thing that is a hobby sim about it is that it has realistic genetics. So early on, when the game was just a tiny prototype, we already had a lot of cat, dog, horse, bird breeders coming into the community and telling us what we should do more accurately with the genetics. And so we kind of took it from there and tried to really bring like how does population genetics actually work into the game with looking at all the different aspects of how it works in real life and turning them into game mechanics.
Perfect. Stefan?
Yes, so I worked on Mars Horizon, which is also not first person. It's a third person. It's a strategy game. It's a simulation game about running your own space agency. Which again, not a hobby sim in the conventional sense, but it was certainly an area as well where we had a lot of very passionate fans coming in, telling us a lot about the small mistakes we were making in with space travel and that sort of thing. So a lot of the fan base would absolutely consider space to be a hobby of theirs. So yeah,
Space is super interesting anyway. Andres?
Right, so yeah, Brewmaster. It's a kind of a beer brewing simulation game. So we're kind of taking the hobby of being a home brewer and kind of making a game out of it. So it's a lot of the chemistry and the fun of creating your own creations, from these base ingredients and then trying to sell and market them. It's pretty similar to, we're trying to make it as similar as it would be in real life. So if you were to make something in the game, you would get similar results in real life.
Okay. Dan?
Yeah, so PowerWash Simulator is exactly what you expect it to be. It is power washing anything you can think of, from the things you'd expect to use probably to start with, so in the garden, maybe the car, and progressively move into stranger and stranger things. There's still a few more to come that are quite interesting. So yeah, that's really what it is.
Yeah, power washing sim, I have to admit, did make me want to buy a power washer. And Wubble Dogs, which is our game, is a 3D pet sim. I guess you could say it's a first-person perspective, but it's a 3D pet sim, and you basically look after and rear your own nest of mutant dogs. And depending on what you feed them and how you treat them, they mutate into other types of mutant dogs. So they can change colour, they can change size, the whole shape can change. So it's who doesn't love dogs? So it's
Our two games actually share a lot of their target audience. So I always hear our players talking also about Wubble Dogs. So
it's the dogs, they wobble, they're great. So the next question we have is, what does a hobby or job sim game, like, what does it need to do, in your opinion? And I think we'll go with Andres first.
I think it honestly really depends on, what the vision of the game is. Like Brewmaster, we're trying to go for something, a little more realistic with the chemistry sim and all that. And that's because, we want something that homebrewers could play and enjoy and feel like it's similar to what they do in real life. But, how many people are going to go into space and manage a space agency, right? It's probably not a lot. So it's like, in that case, it's not really about, simulating something that's like true to life. It's more about like simulating the fantasy version of it, right? With the part that kids are, when you're a kid, when you're dreaming of what you could be, that's what it's trying to simulate a little bit. So I think it so heavily depends on the game itself.
Yeah. You ever get that thing when you were a kid where you're just like, I'm just going to mix these things together and make something that is hopefully drinkable? And it always ended badly. So hopefully you can make some better things in this one. Dan?
Yeah, I agree very much with Andres there. I think, to my mind, what we had as an interesting issue for us is it's not that hard to really buy a PowerWash and do the real thing yourself. So with that in mind, we wanted to really sort of capture the essence of it. It was actually more based on really what you see and what you think it is rather than what it is to do. Whereas I think for a game that's more sort of hardest to achieve in real life, for example, flight simulators or space simulators, like you say, I think there's probably more of a sort of interest in it becoming more technically accurate because you can't do it yourself as easily, if that makes sense. So if you were to make a very, very realistic PowerWash simulator, I think it probably would be an audience for it, but it would be a lot smaller than what we have really gone for, which is that more sort of the feeling, as it were.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, if you say anyone could be able to do it, I would 100% somehow manage to like injure myself. So it's nice. It's safe to do it on a game. It's much better.
There's definitely that benefit
satisfying as well. Philomena?
Yeah, I agree with the things that have been said. Maybe also like the general feeling that you can bring your knowledge into the game and you kind of expect the game to reward you for already having the knowledge, and then also expecting you to learn something from the game that you didn't previously know about the topic that you're interested in. Is something that our players appreciated a lot.
Yeah, I think with Wubble Dogs as well, it's one of those things where one of the things I think that, because I completely agree with everyone's points, but like the kind of learning as well, is that when I first tested Wubble Dogs, I went, I've had dogs before. This will be a breeze. It was not a breeze. You have to stop them from eating poop. It's a feature. And you're following them around and you're having to, and it was definitely a learning experience. But it was also really fun as well. And I'd just be sat there going, what happened to the 3 piles of poop that were all right next to each other? And then there'd just be the dog Randy the dog, everyone's favourite, would just be sat next to it, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess we're going to have some brain mutations then. So I think there's also, especially with the ones like Wobbledogs, it's much different to owning an actual dog, but it's also that experience of going, oh, well, this is what I do in like my day job, and this is a nice way to do somebody else's, or do like just try somebody else's. Stefan?
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing of like being able to do something that you can't normally do, or I mean, I could buy a power washer, but I don't really have a lot of things to power wash. So like, I don't have a garden. I don't have my own house or anything like that. So I'm in short supply of things to power wash. So those sorts of simulation games sort of fill that out. And I also agree with like the learning part of it. Like we integrated a Spacepedia into Mars Horizon, where you would get like the real world. This is what actually happened as you completed missions and did research for the alternate history simulation that we have running along. So yeah, I really like the being able to learn something and get access to something that's a lot harder to do just like in the day-to-day. I think is really cool.
In our case, we kind of overdid it a bit in the end, I think, and now the game is used by biology teachers to teach genetics in class. Wow. Turns out it was quite realistic then.
I mean, that's sort of the goal, though, right?
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, it's like it's that kind of line between is it like this is a realistic true to life thing, or this is a completely bonkers idealized version of it. In actual fact, if I power wash my walls, I'd probably peel the wallpaper off it. I'd give it a good go. Just hand me some like dirty caravans, like yes. So it's like it's kind of that fine line between, do I want something realistic, or do I want something like this is what it would be like living on Mars, for example.
Yeah, I think it just comes back to like fulfilling that fantasy, right? That's what we kind of keep saying. It's like, this is what you imagine it to be like, if the stuff behind it is realistic and accurate, great. But like the most important thing is, does it fulfill that fantasy?
Yeah,
I think being aware of when to stop trying to be realistic is also good, because we worked with the ESA a little bit on Mars Horizon, and we sent the game off to them and they played the game, and a lot of the feedback we had was like, this is a really good representation of the job that I do, but there's far less paperwork, which is something we should definitely not have to put into the game, I think. So
ooh, let me just fill out this risk assessment form.
With no DLC.
You know what? I'm sure somebody loves doing paperwork, loves filling out risk assessment forms.
I think that's a really good point as well. It's knowing where the focus is for the simulation or job that you're making. Like with PowerWash, we found that the act of power washing was just so much fun inherently on a moment-to-moment basis. We tried to keep everything else out of the way so you could just do it, focus on it, and be left alone effectively. Which is like you say, you're taking the administration out of the job and just letting you do it. And going back to this case of like scale as well, cleaning in the backyard, for example, in PowerWash, it takes quite a long time, but compared to how long cleaning that space in real life would take, it's nothing. And we've got different nozzles that are sort of based on the real nozzles, in different colours, and the red nozzle in real life is like a needle. It's this absolutely like tiny little area you clean, whereas in our game it's quite a big blob on the wall. It still gets the essence and the feel of those different nozzles, but the pace at which you can clean it is sort of balanced so that it still feels like it's taking quite a long time, but is also manageable. So like you say, Stefan, it's getting that sense of where do you stop the realism, where do you sort of exaggerate things.
Yeah. Thank you. They were all really good. So the next question is, how did the idea for your game come about? I think with Wobbledogs, it's a difficult one to answer because I am not the developer that came up with the idea for it, and wasn't involved in that. So I'm going to hand that over to everybody else. Ooh. So so I think we'll start it off with we'll go for Philomena because they're quite similar. So
Right. So for me, it's a bit of a longer story. I'll try to keep it short. I couldn't really decide if I wanted to study biology or game design. And in the end, game design won, but I made a deal with myself that my final thesis from university would be a biology game. And evolution and genetics were the topics that I was most interested in. So already, like during the studies, I tried out some different approaches how you could make some cool games about that. And being a Pokemon and an Evoli fan, as you can see in the background, I really liked like having these dog-like creatures that evolved into different shapes depending on how their surroundings influence them. It's a very similar pitch to Wobbledogs. And then I looked at the different pillars of population genetics and just read a bunch of stuff that I would have learned if I studied biology and tried to turn it all into a game. And then a lot of people who had a lot more knowledge about genetics helped me to like find an interesting core mechanic and make it realistic.
Yeah, is there any like were there any like elements that were important to you to actually include in the game as well?
Yeah, so like the original pitch idea for the game was that in all other games you are always the one that shapes the environment, and I wanted to turn it around and have a game where the environment shapes you. And genetics were also just a very good mechanic and evolution to show this kind of mechanic.
Amazing. Who wants to go next? Has anybody got an answer lined up, ready to go?
I can go.
Okay, yeah, go for it, Dan.
So yeah, PowerWash actually predates me joining Futurlab, and it's apparently the story goes that they were on a brainstorm meeting off-site, and James Marsden, who's the CEO, and the development director, Kirsty Rigdon, they were in basically trying to find a way of making a first-person shooter at a lower budget because they were interested in making a sort of an indie game, but sort of inspired by Superhot and what they'd done. And they're sort of just going through ideas, and James just sort of throwing some ideas out, like, what about if you were a sniper and you just had to stay in the same place, or if you had a power washer? And apparently Kirsty immediately just jumped up and went, that's it, Power Wash Simulator. And she immediately sort of saw the potential for this idea. And they quickly made a prototype for it, and that was released actually on itch.io during the start of the pandemic, as sort of like a way for people to relax while being in isolation. And it got quite a lot of good feedback, so that gave them confidence to take it further. So that's where I joined a little bit after that, sort of flesh it out into a whole game. But what was interesting was they'd already nailed the idea of it being just power washing. So I came in sort of with a typical sort of design approach, like, oh well, would you maybe have time limits or maybe water limits? And they go, no, it's just power washing. I was like, all right, I see. And I think it could be quite a hard pitch, I think, to pitch up to maybe your director, the idea of just having a game where you just power wash. So I'm grateful that they'd already seen that, because I think it's definitely the right way to go, and its popularity seems to suggest that's the case.
Yeah, I'd love to be in some of these meetings just for the we're going to make a game. Oh yeah, what kind of game is it? I'm just going to power wash stuff.
Exactly. It's not an obvious idea, but really what happens, Kirsty had seen a lot of videos online over like the preceding months on Reddit, but hadn't quite pieced the things together. So when James actually said it out loud, suddenly it clicked. There's clearly an interest in this, and for some reason it doesn't exist yet. So it's one of those unusual situations where a really fun mechanic hasn't really been explored at all. So that gave us a real free rein to do what we wanted.
Yeah, it's super satisfying as well. It's like that is the key thing I take is like it's super satisfying.
It is the most commonly heard word we get back feedback wise. We can see the word satisfying every time. So yeah. It's really, really, really satisfying to hear that.
Yeah. Stefan?
Yes. Well, Mars Horizon predated me joining Auroch as well. but for everything I've heard was basically just, people really liked space, and they wanted to just, explore that in a game. And I think that's probably a common theme between a lot of these games, is that the idea of wanting to make it a game is probably like, we really like this thing, let's just run with it. Because I know that, even like my personal stuff, I'll mess around in Unity sometimes. I'll just, I like this thing, I'm going to try and make this thing, and sometimes that will evolve into a proper game. But it's just, I think, just the people that are making these things are probably just really interested in the thing they're making.
Yeah. Andres, are you gonna say I'm interested? What are you gonna say? I'm interested in beer, or?
Well, I'm gonna say what the last two people have said, and that it actually predates me too. But I do have the story, and it's similar. Yeah. A little different. Basically, there was a group of people at Auroch just kind of sitting around at a table and trying to figure out what they wanted to make next, and they knew they wanted to make something that both simultaneously appealed to a widespread audience, but also had very niche appeal, which is kind of like a strange, almost like juxtaposition like type of thing to try to aim for. But they settled on beer, and it's like, well, a lot of people are super into beer, and a lot of people are very casually into beer, so it's like, it's the perfect subject. And from there, they're like, okay, well, what about beer? And that was the big question, is like, what about beer? Like, what do we want to make the game about? And someone there had some amateur experience in home brewing, and that it was a thing that they knew was interesting, but also had complexity if you really wanted to dive into it, like the chemistry stuff. So it was pretty much perfect, like right on the nose of something that kind of fulfilled the requirements of something that they wanted to make next. So yeah, that's how Brewmaster was born. Personally, for me, like, what I think is like something that is important that is included from beer brewing is, like, when I think of beer brewing, I think of just like having fun and going crazy a little bit and being experimental. Obviously in real life there's dangers to that and there's a high cost to that, but like in a game, you remove the danger, you remove the cost, you could kind of just go crazy. Like, we had someone in our alpha try to make bread, which was the funniest thing to me. And I'm like, this is exactly what Brewmaster is about, right? It's just like experimenting with the ingredients and trying to come up with something fun and wild.
Yeah. Can you make beer bread? You can make beer bread, right? I'm sure you can make beer bread.
Oh, I'm sure someone somewhere has figured it out.
See, now I want to try and make beer bread. And I should have learned my lesson after I tried to make cider, homemade cider. And you were talking about the risks. There were risks to drinking the homemade cider. So I think I'll definitely stick to the game. It tasted like vinegar. What did I do wrong? So thank you so much for those answers. The next question that we have is basically kind of talking about realism. If we can go on to a little bit more details about, like, the kind of like fantasy games. So like Wobbledogs is, I'd say that Wobbledogs is definitely more fantasy based. If your dog eats something and it mutates, please take it to the vet in real life. But so things like Wobbledogs and Niche, I find with Wobbledogs that there's a lot of freedom to experiment with these things, and again, it's not particularly realistic at all, in that you really shouldn't be feeding your dog's poop and cheeseburgers. I mean, you can feed your dog cheeseburgers, but I wouldn't recommend it. And the whole thing about, like, I'm going to feed them these things, or I'm going to do these things to see, like, if we get different colours or more interesting colours. So it's definitely more fantasy based. I'm imagining it's quite similar with Niche as well. Yeah. So basically, the question is, Do you find the for anybody that has a more fantasy based, do you find that the greater freedom you get from it being a fictional job or hobby makes it easier to design the game overall? And where do you draw the line with what you include? We'll go for Philomena first.
Yeah, I can take it from Wobbledogs, right?
Yeah.
So it's like the natural flow
nice,
of the discussion.
Here you go.
So yeah, I was like, okay, in Wobbledogs, you mutate when you eat something. In Niche, we were like, okay, you can only mutate your kids because like the mutation happens in the gene when you're actually mating. So that was one of the things where we try to be more realistic. Then again, it's basically evolution sped up 1,000-fold. So the evolution happens like from one generation to the next generation. And yeah, there were so many decisions on making it more realistic or making it more fun. And I think our players were happy as long as we kept the genetics more or less realistic, and everything else is pretty much open to having a fantasy world. We tried to also like have all the different species in the game that you sometimes have to fight against, or they are your prey. We tried to have them be inspired by real life animals and mixing them. But there's also like some totally fantasy stuff, like there's some boss creatures that are apes, and one cannot hear and one cannot see and one cannot smell. So that's kind of totally culturally inspired. So we mixed it all up a bit. As long as genetics were fine, people were fine with it.
Yeah. I feel like, Stefan, you're probably like another kind of like natural progression. I don't know how realistic it is that we're going to be going to Mars anytime. Probably soon, but probably not myself. So we'll go for you next.
I mean, realism was one of our pillars of doing Mars Horizon, in that we wanted to be as realistic to what went on during the space race as possible. So like all of the key events are in there, a lot of the vehicles and payloads are in there, but at the same time it is like an alternate history, and we've always tried to put that across as like, this isn't real, it's like based around the real events. And for good reasons of like the European Space Agency didn't exist when we start the game. But we wanted to have 5 agencies in there, and that we made the concession that, well, maybe they're let's pretend they were here. But we still get the key points of like Russia and the USA, and we tried to simulate that they don't like each other very much at the start of the game. There's the fall of the Soviet Union in there, and we tried to hit as much as we can to maintain the realism whilst fitting it around the game design and ensuring that the game as well is accessible as much as we can make it. Because that was another part of when trying to make Mars Horizon. We wanted it to appeal to space fans who knew a lot about the topic, but also just people who wanted to play a strategy game or wanted to learn more about what happened, and just understand a little bit more about the process of running a space agency.
Yeah. So the realism was, was quite important. It was quite important in Mars Horizon.
It's important to the point that we wanted to include it in as many places as possible without it detrimenting from the game itself. Was the goal. Yeah,
you got to make it fun as well. So it's I can't imagine how it wouldn't be fun though. So we're kind of in like the more with Mars Horizon, we've started off with the more kind of realistic, like the realism in the games is a bit more important. So what about with Brewmaster?
It's very similar to kind of Niche, I think, a little bit, where the most important thing with Niche was, if the genetics were accurate, right? For us, it's the most important thing is the chemistry is accurate, right? That's what people kind of expect from a beer brewing simulation game, and that's what we want to deliver. Not only what they expect. So it's like, as long as that is accurate, we could kind of fit the game design around that, right? Like a lot of it is like, we're not going to make you sit around and wait weeks at a time for your beer to properly ferment and all that. You could skip time, and then even time itself is a little flubbed. Like seasons don't necessarily progress like normal. Like they just all have like the same amount of days in them, and like there's not really months and stuff like that. So like there's a lot of like things where it's like, all right, it's not really important to the game. It's not important to the beer brewing. We could just, no one really cares. As long as the beer brewing itself is realistic, that's what people care about. That's what people are coming to the game for. If a beer brewer makes a certain L, and then they try to recreate that in the game, they should get the same thing, or at least a close approximation of it, right? And as long as we do that, I think we've kind of done our job with realism, and then from there, it's just about making a fun game.
Yeah, so it's super. It's super realistic especially in the chemistry sense as well. Then.
Yes, absolutely.
And Dan with PowerWash.
Yeah, so that was actually the first question I asked James and Kirsty when I joined, was on the spectrum of simulator games from like the Microsoft Flight Simulator at 10 and Surgeon Simulator at 1. Whereabouts are we on the spectrum for realism? What do we want? And it could really be anywhere. We could have made a really, really wacky game where you're knocking things over and all sorts. The number I got from them was like 6, which wasn't really what you hope for when you're trying to find the right number. But what we realised was that we wanted realistic equipment, but not necessarily realistic things you clean. So we sort of separated it from 1 scale to 2. So in terms of realism for the equipment, it was an 8, whereas for the actual things you do and the way you do it is more like a 4. So that was really the way of breaking those things down. And then with regards to, I actually found the realism side what made it easier to design. I think it would have been probably harder had it been a bit more unusual, because you've got like a baseline for reality. You can sort of, what you're trying to emulate because you can see it in real life, and also you can sort of gear the equipment to the limits are already constrained there for you, so you can then work out where are the things you can move, what can you change. So with the demo, what we found was that all you had was about 4 different nozzles you had, but what you found is you just used the widest one, and there's no reason to use any of the other ones. So that was really the breakthrough, was working out if we had multiple layers of dirt and you needed to use smaller nozzles for harder dirt to remove, then we can get pacing into the game. We can slow people down in different areas. We can also progress up to more powerful washers that you clean tougher dirt quicker. So those things sort of came out of the inherent realism of it, and that was the only real thing we had to manipulate, was the power of the water. So by having such constraints, it allowed us to find where we wanted the game to go. But I think also the big thing really in terms of realism, which is really credit to the code and the art and the audio, for the water effect and the actual bringing the dirt off the walls to make it look like it does in those videos that everyone watches online. And the sound of it also just sort of taking your mind to where you are and letting you just focus on the cleaning, I think is really therapeutic. So all those factors together really allowed PowerWash to succeed, I think.
Yeah, that actually follows quite nicely onto our next question, which is, what is the most surprising or challenging part of your game to make, and why? Because you were talking about the difficulties. Like if it was less realistic, it would probably be more difficult. So if you if you'd like to continue on.
Yeah, sure. So balancing it so that you felt like you were legitimately cleaning an area without being trivial, but also not being boring or too time consuming, was actually a really hard balance to get. We were really balancing that right up to nearly launch, just trying to get that feeling right. And it also meant sometimes you need to rearrange like the level. So if we had too many fences, for example, right, this is taking too long in this area, how about we replace these with hedges? So trying to get the amount of time you spend in each environment to be correct was pretty tricky. The thing which I don't think we were necessarily expecting to be as tricky as it was, especially when we got to bigger and bigger levels, was working out how to break down the level into subtasks. So when you're going around cleaning things, you get these different elements pinging effectively when you clean them. But working out where it was satisfying to say, okay, I've done this bit of the wall. I really want to get a ding at this point, and this wall should be treated as a separate wall, even though they are sort of connected. Well, how do we make it that clear to the player? Maybe we add a trim between them to put a bit of wood between the two. So working that sort of that way of breaking the level down has become really quite elaborate, and I think we've learned a lot over the time when we're working through.
Yeah, it's I can't really say much again about Wobbledogs because I'm not any of the developers. I work in marketing, so I'm gonna fire it at somebody else. We'll go for Andres now.
Yeah, so I think it's kind of gonna depend on who you ask on Brewmaster, but personally, the thing that caught me the most off guard with how difficult it was and continues to be is pouring. As weird as that sounds, pouring liquid from one container into another is surprisingly difficult if you're not making it kind of like a static can thing, because it's a first-person game where you could kind of like place things wherever and combine liquids in different ways to create different liquids and things like that, and put grains in liquids and all sorts of crazy stuff. So having a pouring system that looks good with every possible container and combination and location turned out to be a difficult thing and continues to be a difficult thing. But it's also, I think, the thing that I'm like most proud of, because like it's a surprisingly complex system for something that's so easy in real life, right? When you pour liquid, but it's a lot of it is like there's a lot of math that's not interesting to talk about going into it, right? So for me, definitely pouring. But I also know some of the other devs, specifically yeast, implementing yeast in the chemical sim was sort of a difficult thing because, yeast is, you could have billions of yeast in a container all doing their own thing. So we had to have the discussion of how granular do we want to simulate these yeasts? Like, can we group them up? Is that fair for the simulation? Things like that.
Yeah, I'm gonna be on the lookout for pouring now when I go around to playing it, just because my knowledge of pouring is like you tilt the glass, and it's when the beer is already made. You tilt the glass and you pour the beer in the tilted glass, and that's how I know. That's the only bit that I know. So I'll be keeping my eye out for it.
When I'm with the other Brewmaster devs, it is a recurring joke to get me a straw so that I don't have PTSD flashbacks from like having to pour a drink down my mouth. Like it's that level of specific to me, where they're like, oh, careful, don't pour any drinks in front of Andres, or he'll just like lock up and shut down.
I've been pouring my drinks wrong. Like,
but the pouring's very good, so you're justifiably proud of it. This was very well done.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it now. I'm going to be like watching like a hawk. I'm like, yes, there's Andres pouring. The pouring's in. It's perfect. Stefan?
Sorry, I got so distracted by the pouring. I almost forgot what the question was then.
It's magical. The question is just, what is the most surprising or challenging part of the game to make, and why?
Yeah, so I mean, Mars Horizon, we get away with a lot more because we're not Kerbal, and we can smoke and mirrors a lot of it. It's about managing the space agency. It's not about the physics of space. So we can make a lot more concessions in that regard. But I think some of the most challenging stuff it was more on design and art to get everything correct. Like we really had to make sure that the small details of the ESA rockets and payloads and like historical rockets and everything would work together. People really wanted things like the N7 booster to be able to carry the correct things, and people really wanted accurate weights, and making sure that we were following along with things historically being able to do what they were doing in the past, and we weren't bending the rules too much on that. And then I think also just actually making it feel like you're running the space agency was an important part of this, in that we had a narrative system for this, the whole like simulation, where you'd have really ridiculously long payoffs for very specific things that you do. Like if you finished first in the moon landing in a race against a rival, 50 years later you'd get a related narrative that came up to it, just like rewarding ridiculous things you've done in the past. Like we're just implementing things like that just to try and make it feel like what you're doing in this universe matters. And that, I'm sure, was an absolute nightmare for design, because I had about 100 tasks to write that narrative system just for the code. So I feel sorry for the designer who had to write it all. So.
And Philomena?
Well, in my case, let me grab this. So in the game, you basically have these very cute thingies, right? And you're taking care of them. And it's a survival game, so they die. And because you are speeding up evolution also, so it's a game about population genetics, right? It's not a game about this specific cute guy. He has to die like only after like 20 minutes of lifetime, so you can see the next generation and evolve. And that's kind of an inherited inherent problem, right? Cute animals that have to die don't go well together. And so and also like having a survival game but with cute animals, so you have a huge diversity of players. Some are like super hardcore and they want to be constantly attacked and fight, and climate change hits them. And you have the other side of the players who just want to hang out on a flower field with their creatures. And like, how do you put all of these players into one game? It was very challenging. And I think in the end, the sandbox mode and all the settings that you could like use to configure your game helped a lot. So you could make your animals live for a very long time. And then we have some people who basically just role play with their animals, and it's not about genetics anymore. But yeah, it was a challenge to kind of find a balance. And I'm sure there were a lot of trade-offs for either side of the spectrum of the players that had to be made for the other side of the spectrum.
Yeah. It's similar in Wobbledogs. Apart from the first time I played Wobbledogs, I went into it completely just not knowing anything. I was like, I just want to get some first impressions of it, so I filmed it, and I didn't know that the dogs could die. And when they are cute, and they let out this howl before they die, and I think I literally screamed. I just went, not the dogs! I can't believe they died. My first dog, I think she was called like Babs, and then she passed away. I was like, oh, heartbreaking. So they went completely the opposite. We were like, we don't care about you being hurt here. They're just gonna let out a sad howl, and that'll be it. They'll be dead.
I once was at an exhibition with an early version of the game, and the mom came by with like her 4-year-old daughter because the graphics are so cute. Oh, let's play this game. And then the predator came and ate her baby. And then I had to explain to the 4-year-old kid that her baby is now eaten by the predator. And the kid was like totally like, okay. And the mom was like, what? But the poor baby. It was a very weird experience.
You seem very excited about it, though. You're
yeah.
Like, yes.
No, I was kind of sorry, but like I was surprised that the kid was like, she asked me like why, and I'm like, yeah, that happens in nature, and she's like, okay. And the mom was the one that was like super shocked about it. It was funny to me.
The smart kids. The next one we have is. It's a fun one. What sort of feedback do you get from your community about why they play your game? What do they like? Is there anything that they ask to be added? I think the Wobbledogs community is they're lovely. They're incredibly wholesome. Things like what's added. I've definitely seen one comment that is, do they have to die? And it's like, yes, otherwise you would be overrun with these wobbling dogs that can just, they're like wobbling everywhere. So we've definitely had that requested before. But what about everybody else? Is there anything that your community asks for, and is the feedback, for example, is the feedback, oh my god, the animals die, or is it just more is it just this is great, give us more? Do you want to we'll start with Philomena again, just to like, because of the Wobbledogs,
makes
nice
sense.
blurring.
So always new genes, new customization, all these kinds of things. They have a catalog of every possible pattern color that can exist in the game, and it's a few thousand. So they breed them and make photos of them. Like it feels like a cat breeder community, kind of, in that terms, that they make their prettiest kind of coats and share them, and everybody else like, oh, how did you reach this result, and this kind of stuff. One thing that they wanted forever that we haven't added is heterochromia, that you can have like different eye colors and all this kind of stuff mostly. And they have always requests for like more settings that they can just customize their own challenges and play the game the way that they want to play it. And multiplayer. Everybody always wants multiplayer.
Everybody wants multiplayer. Yeah, that is very similar with Wobbledogs as well, as you know, the mutations. But you can get some really interesting mutations. I think maybe Andres, do you want to take the next one?
Yeah. The thing we've gotten mostly back from, and we've had an alpha fairly recently, was basically more things to play with, more ingredients, more containers, more equipment, which is great. That's what we want to hear. You know, that tells us that, like, you know, beer brewing is a fun, you know, thing to do, right? And now they just want to be able to do more different things with it. So a lot of it has just been give us more things to play with for the next time we see this game. And that's definitely like one of our top priorities, is give the players enough things to play with so that they could, you know, let their imaginations run wild of what they can make, or even just like, you know, possibly try to make something that they've done in real life before.
Yeah. Can you how far does the manufacturing process go? Is it like up to the bottling? Like, would you like add anything, like make your own labels? Here's a bottle shaped like a watermelon. Is like, is there anything that you'd add?
Yeah, we actually do have that process in it as well. You know, you kind of choose your bottle, you design your own labels. You know, you come up with a name for it, all that stuff, all of the things in the packaging is something that, you know, we're currently working on, and is super exciting because, you know, a lot of home brewers get to the part where they like make a mason jar of beer, then that's it, right? So it's nice that we could go a little further here, and like you could even kind of like market it to like breweries nearby, and like they'll maybe like sell some of your new concoction, right? And that's like a source of income, and it definitely goes further than just, you know, making the beer. We do go further down that line, that process, and it's just another way for players to show their creativity again, you know, and kind of imagine, you know, use their imagination to come up with something cool.
Yeah, that sounds cool. I like that. Dan, with PowerWash Sim, you mentioned that your community used the word satisfying a lot. Is there anything else?
Yeah, that's normally the feedback we get for people who play the game. There's, like you say with Andres, like there's loads of requests for new content, so loads of great ideas come through from the community all the time. Our community manager Josh makes a massive Excel spreadsheet of all the ideas people have been suggesting, so we're keeping track of all of them. Any ones that appear repeatedly get further attention in the future. And the other one is multiplayer, like you said as well, Philomena. The multiplayer was the big one we dropped in December into the game. There's a load of requests from that from day one, really. And we were also planning for it for day one as well. So we've been working alongside for quite a long time before we released it, but we didn't really mention it until it literally came out. I think it was very early December. And that seems to have gone down really well. And there's videos of people playing together and having lots of fun. So yeah, that was a really satisfying update for us there.
And Stefan?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a really nice community around Mars Horizon. When we launched, we had some nice stories from people who were like, we had a professor who was in Barcelona who said they played the game with their son, and was like, hey, this is what I do as a job. And it was like a nice way for him to show what he does as a career. Those sorts of stories are really cool. In terms of what people want, it is again just more content. That seems to be the common trend, is that when you have these simulations, people just want more things to play with. In Mars Horizon, they want more vehicles, they want reusable boosters, they want more payloads, they want more missions. Like particularly when something happens in the real world, like the Perseverance and stuff like that. When those things happen, there's usually a flourish of like, hey, this cool thing happened. It'd be really good if I could use it in the game. That's a very common thing for us. I think particularly because of what we're doing. But like taking real world things and putting them in the game is something that people definitely want a lot.
That was our last question. So we've only got a few minutes left. So just to remind everybody that watches this today, that the games were so Philomena. If you give yourself, we'll give ourselves a little wave, and we'll just remind people of your game. So Philomena, you've been working on Niche. Stefan, you have been working on Mars Horizon. Andres, you've been working on Brewmaster, and Dan for PowerWash Sim. So we'll close the panel there. My brain is having a moment.
That's fine.
Thank you for moderating this, Harriet.
I am, yeah. It would be good if my brain, if it worked, that would be really nice. So we're gonna close the panel there. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming on and talking to us about your amazing games. Hopefully, people can pick them up and play them, and there will be links to more below. And yeah, that's us. Everybody, wave goodbye, and we'll speak again soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks,
See you.
everyone.
Hi.